Welcome, everyone, to the Boswell Book Company virtual event series. Today is day 4,730 that Boswell has been in business, and we're really pleased to welcome Kelly Weill to Milwaukee, or this virtual approximation of Milwaukee. Let me tell you that tonight's event has been generously co-sponsored by Wisconsin Public Radio, and I want you to check them out. The Ideas Network broadcasts here in the Milwaukee Metro at 90.7 FM, and you can visit them all over the world at WPR.org. Tonight, our conversation partner is Doug Gordon, host and producer for WPR's Beta. And I'm really pleased to have Doug here tonight. When I read Off the Edge, the book they're going to be talking about, I immediately thought of Doug. Books I thought right up his alley, and he's done fantastic reporting himself on conspiracy theories. So I think this conversation is going to be a real treat as he chats with Kelly Weill. Weill is, of course, a reporter for the Daily Beast, where she covers extremism, disinformation, and the internet. She's appeared on Nightline, CNN, Al Jazeera, and lots of other national and international outlets. Actually, just did a great piece segment on CNN for this book. And she's here tonight to discuss Off the Edge, flat earthers, conspiracy culture, and why people will believe anything. So let's get this evening started. I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug, and I will disappear.
Thank you very much, Chris. Kelly, thank you for joining us tonight, and congratulations on Off the Edge. It's a very compelling book. For those of our watchers and listeners who haven't read it yet or don't know much about it, can you give us kind of an elevator pitch about the book?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me. Off the Edge was my exploration of conspiracy culture through the lens of the Flat Earth movement. And I wanted to get to know the interesting characters who made up this movement, but also explore more deeply why people come to believe the things that they do.
Mm-hmm. And do you have well, there's a copy of the book right behind you. Maybe you have one in front of you too. Could you read us, give us a short reading, a page or so?
Absolutely. So I'll start at the beginning, which I hear is a good place to start.
Yeah, that's what Julie Andrews always says.
So this opens up with a character named Mike Hughes, who, if you read the book, he recurs a couple times. The summer before he fell from the sky, Mike Hughes was experimenting with amateur jet propulsion. It was going badly. Problem again today, he texted me in 2019. With a rocket or weather, I asked. Rocket. This was his second failure in 2 days, and I'd lost count of the times he'd run into trouble with wind or parachutes or spare rocket parts he'd purchased off of Craigslist for $325. Most people would have given up years earlier, maybe taken up a less lethal hobby. I certainly thought he'd quit. He's got to know, right? I remember asking my husband. I was standing in our kitchen, texting Hughes with one hand and brandishing a spatula with another, making an omelet while trying to talk Hughes out of launching himself into low orbit. Deep down, he's got to know Earth is round, and that's why he keeps having these rocket failures. Earth is round, and he doesn't want to prove it. I liked Mike. He was an offbeat guy, but a good one. We'd met the previous year at a conference for people who believe Earth is flat. I was there as a journalist for the Daily Beast, the news website where I reported on extremist movements and conspiracy theories. He was there to drum up support for a self-manned rocket launch into the upper atmosphere, during which he would decide the planet's shape for himself. He and I sat around talking trash and the particulars of rocket science. Throughout the next year, he'd send me updates, pictures of rocket designs, gossip from the conspiracy scene, and invitations to more conspiracy conventions. This wasn't a guy with a death wish. This was a man who'd lived 6 bombastic decades and had no intention of stopping. So when he texted me about a summer's worth of rocket troubles, I thought it was his good sense finally rebelling against a bad idea. After all, who truly thought Earth was flat?
Thank you very much for that. Kelly, what is it about the flat Earth theory that inspired you to write a whole book about it?
You know, I've always been interested in conspiracy theories and the roles they play in our politics and how we believe, but I thought Flat Earth was maybe the best case study for how people really can believe everything, as the book title says. It's so out there that it requires just an enormous suspension of disbelief. And I think it's a really interesting way of exploring exactly how belief works in general.
And you say that flat Earth is the ultimate incarnation of conspiratorial thinking. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure thing. So, most people actually do entertain some conspiratorial thinking. It's a very natural thought process. But it's one thing to believe, say, alternate explanations of the JFK assassination, and another thing to embrace a theory that literally encompasses your worldview. So, whereas some of these other conspiracy theories can coexist fairly comfortably alongside accepted reality, a theory like flat Earth is so broad that it creates its own reality.
Yeah. For the purposes of your book, you define a conspiracy theory as an unproven allegation of a secret, deliberate, and malevolent plot, like a scheme to conceal the true shape of the world. So in the minds of flat earthers, who is hiding this flat world away from everyone else? Who is hiding it from them, and why?
That is the fundamental question. And I've asked flat earthers that for about 5 years, and you'll get different answers and different explanations from a lot of people. The most broad answer for someone who doesn't just say, well, I don't know, the most broad answer is they'll say that world governments are doing the cover up, or that this is part of a plot by NASA or the military to keep people subdued and to trick people into believing that they live in a certain version of reality. Other people tie it to religion a bit more, and they'll say that preaching the globe model distracts from a real biblical worldview, which they think is flat. There are other, I think, darker explanations. I've met a number of people who invoke anti-Semitic conspiracy theories when asked to this question. Everybody does really have their own answer. And the strangest one I ever heard was a man who said that he believed that the government was saying Earth was round so that they could trick us into believing in outer space, so they could trick us into believing in aliens, so that when Jesus returns, we would mistake Jesus for an alien and kill him on sight. So it does run the gamut from more mainstream governmental conspiracy theories to some really out there beliefs.
Yeah, definitely, especially the example you just gave us. What kinds of evidence do flat Earth believers offer to support their conviction, their belief that we are living in a flat world?
Mm-hmm. Well, the fact of it is that they have to offer doctored evidence because there is no real evidence that we live in a flat world. But what they've been doing since the beginning of this movement is things that resemble science in a kind of warped way. They'll do what they think are experiments, and they will go and try and measure the horizon and maybe fudge some of the measurements, or use a trick of the light to make it seem like the horizon goes for longer than it should on a round Earth. Or, they will make more philosophical arguments, or they'll say that, if the world is really spinning so many thousands of miles an hour, that we should be able to feel it, and we don't feel it. That's a very common one. That's a lot of people in my inbox are saying that right now. And a lot of people just cite religious texts. They'll find something in the Bible that seems to support a flat Earth. They like to find references to circles, and those things, depending on the exact flavor of someone's flat Earth belief, tend to make up enough evidence for them to be satisfied.
You trace the beginning of the flat Earth theory back to 1838 and a man named Samuel Burley Rowbotham, who was part of a utopian community in Cambridgeshire, England. What can you tell us about him?
Sure. So Samuel Rowbotham was this English eccentric, and he had a lot of false starts before finally settling on flat Earth. As a young man, he was a bit of a utopian. He was part of this socialist commune that lasted for about 2 years and imploded terribly. And after that, he pivoted to trying to sell miracle cures, basically a soda pop that he said would make you live forever. And after that, he started returning to some of these experiments that he said he did while working on this utopian commune. He said that he had waded into a canal on the commune, and that when he looked out with a telescope, he could see far beyond where you should be able to see on a round Earth. And those experiments, although we know he's either lying or messing up his measurements in some way, formed the basis of books that he started selling about flat Earth theory, and lecture circuits he started selling, where he could very capably defend this theory, even though there was a lack of evidence. So all of the flat Earth theory that we encounter today really has its DNA in these weird experiments that this guy was running on a utopian commune in the 1830s.
And those weird experiments, that was kind of, or one of them anyway, was the Bedford level experiment. Is that right?
That's right. So the Bedford level is the nickname of this canal that I referenced, and it's 6 miles long. It's flat and straight. And if you were ever going to make an argument that Earth was flat, this is a pretty good place for it, because it really does look flat from there. And what's funny is that this canal has actually become kind of a mecca for flat earthers in years to come. People would go and try and recreate those experiments there, and scientists have dutifully come out and done the same experiments and showed that, yes, it shows Earth is round, but it's a weird little quirk of an otherwise unknown waterway.
As you mentioned, Rowbotham published his findings about flat Earth, and one of the publications, maybe the most famous one, was a pamphlet called Zetetic Astronomy, Earth Not a Globe. What can you tell us about this pamphlet?
Sure. So Zetetic Astronomy refers to a model of science that Rowbotham pioneered. And I think modern readers can actually recognize a lot of this in more modern conspiracy thinking. Zetetic basically referred to the idea that you should only believe what you can personally confirm with your own eyes and ears. And that sounds all well and good on paper until you start thinking about what it implies. So, I mean, I have never been to New Mexico, but I believe New Mexico is real because I've met people who are from New Mexico and I've seen pictures, and it would, really, I'd need to come up with a really strange explanation for why everybody in the world was lying to me about New Mexico's existence. So even though I haven't personally confirmed it, I'm going to trust that it's real. That is what we do with 1,000 times a day. We trust, that information is valid, even though we can't personally confirm it. But how it gets weaponized in conspiracy beliefs is that a flat earther will say, well, have you ever gone and verified the curvature of the Earth in this place? Do you personally know how fast the Earth is going around the sun? And if you don't know that stuff, then your ignorance points to a willingness to believe misinformation. It's a very weird inversion of the scientific process, but for people who were somewhat receptive to what Rowbotham was selling, it was compelling to them.
Yeah, you have this great description of what Rowbotham thought the Earth looked like. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Sure. So there have been multiple models of flat Earth over the years, and he had kind of an earlier one, but he suggested that Earth was flat, but that it was almost floating on this dark and creepy ocean, this kind of limitless deep. And he had, notions of hell raising up from the bottom again. And, it was a very apocalyptic vision in which the world would, turn to fire and brimstone again. But it was a very frightening vision of the world in which we were in this kind of flat, safe little cradle in otherwise frightening expanse.
And you have this great description of what he thought of Antarctica. That was like the greatest, as you write in your book, the greatest casualty of his rearranged map. Can you describe what he thought Antarctica looked like in this flat Earth theory?
Absolutely. So flat earthers have always kind of struggled with how to map a globe onto a flat surface. If you can imagine, it's very difficult to do that. So what Rowbotham and onwards have done is, if you can imagine cutting the globe open at the bottom and spreading it out, And Antarctica goes from being, a concentrated area of ice to this ring of ice around the outside that's almost holding it all together. It's the periphery. And so from Rowbotham's floating Earth model to modern flat earthers, they will often describe Antarctica as this impermeable ice wall around the world.
And I think near the end of your book, you write about some the people who are actually offering tours, like would take you on a tour to the outer edge to Antarctica.
That's right, or at least you're right that they were offering the tours.
Yes, that's
whether they materialized or not is less certain, because Antarctica does have this very mysterious presence in the flat Earth world. It is, for them, it is the edge of Earth. And if you can go there, maybe you can find some answers. So I've documented at least 2 instances where people said, hey, buddy, I'll take you to the edge of the Earth if you pay me, a deposit of $10,000. And these people, no surprise, cut and ran with the money.
Yeah. Let's fast forward to 2004 and a guy who went by the name of Daniel Shenton. How did he become a flat earther?
Sure. So, from Rowbotham's time up into the internet era, flat Earth has ebbed and flowed, and there have been flat Earth clubs and societies. And Daniel Shenton revived what was an older flat Earth society in the UK. He said he actually discovered flat Earth quite by accident, finding a song that kind of satirically or metaphorically referenced the flat Earth. And he went digging and he found all this old literature. And he digitized a lot of it. He restored it and he started accepting members into the new Flat Earth Society, which still exists to this day. It's not the predominant flat Earth institution, but it really catalyzed flat Earth from this kind of wacky offline conspiracy that didn't have a lot of life into something that was really present online and was soon able to thrive there.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way Shenton found his entry point into believing in the flat Earth theory was when he was listening to the English musician Thomas Dolby's 1984 album, The Flat Earth. That's what inspired him to create the new society, right?
That's right. That's what he says in all his forum writings. Is he was listening to this album, which is not a pro flat Earth album. It's it's an electronic music album, but he got to thinking about it and went searching for these older trails that previous flat earthers had left in their own writings, and he brought it into the digital age.
Would it be fair to say that Thomas Dolby blinded Daniel Shenton with junk science?
I don't know if that's fair to say. It's a good reference, but it was one of those, I think, serendipitous things where a completely innocuous reference like Dolby's album called The Flat Earth got somebody thinking about something that to most people is ludicrous, and yet it inspired enough people online that we do sort of have Dolby to thank for this.
Yeah, you mentioned the internet a moment ago, and can you talk about what kind of role the internet and social media have played in the growth of the Flat Earth movement?
Absolutely. So, the Flat Earth movement has always actually been kind of an early pioneer of emerging communication structures. Rowbotham was, he was running his own publications and self-publishing quite early. And, in the early 1900s, there was a flat Earth town really that had its own radio station and was domineering the radio waves before most other institutions could do that. And flat Earth also was very savvy about how to use the internet to its advantage. So the Flat Earth Society had forums and publications, things like that throughout, the early aughts. But when Flat Earth really came into its own was when people discovered the power of YouTube and other social media sites, because these sites don't work just like a forum where anything goes and it's almost luck of the draw if you find a post. these platforms have algorithms and they recommend content that they think you're going to click on and you're going to engage with. And unfortunately, and I think this is true of almost all of us, certainly true of me, the things that we click on are often weird and they're sensational because that's just what you're interested in at 2 a.m. And flat Earth absolutely falls under that rubric. People were clicking what at the beginning were the very few flat Earth videos. And because those videos performed so well, they started getting recommended to people. People realized that, hey, I can get a decent following if I make flat Earth videos. So it snowballed, and you had people finding this theory by accident and people getting into the theory because they knew that they could get some engagement from it. And then the other component I would reference when it comes to social media is that social media lets people find each other and build community. And often that's very nice. But in this case, whereas if you were a flat earther in 1970, you probably wouldn't meet another flat earther, you'd meet just one. Here, you can network with them all across the globe, and you can build what's actually a quite robust community from an obscure belief.
Yeah, very well said. Do you have any idea how many people believe in the flat Earth theory?
I would love to know. It's very difficult to tell. And part of the reason is that flat earthers aren't always forthcoming about their beliefs. Sometimes they're very afraid of being mocked. There have been a couple studies, and I'm a little cautious about their methodology, but they've asked people, do you think Earth is flat? And both of them came out with about 1% of people. Again, I'm a little cagey on that because I think if you ask people, some people might fib their answers because I think it's funny. Others might conceal their beliefs. But what I will say is that I've been to flat Earth conferences where there were 600 paying attendees, and all of them thought Earth was flat. And 600 flat Earthers in one room in 2018, that's a little bit too much, I think.
And what is that like for you to be among all the? How does that affect you emotionally and psychologically, being among these 600 believers who believe the Earth is flat?
It's a little disorienting because it's a real revelation to realize that you're the only person in this huge room, or one of very few, who sees the world the way you do. Everybody else has a radically different model than you. And in some ways, it did inspire a little empathy in me with flat earthers, because I could understand how they probably feel day to day. They usually feel alienated, but it was definitely strange. And when I'm reporting on these conferences, I'm always upfront about who I am and what I believe. I'm a journalist, I'm a round earther, but I'm still happy to talk. And it was only when I started getting into conversations with people, once we got past the initial people would try and debate me about the Earth's shape. Once we got past that and started talking about why they believed, that it was, it started to make a little bit more sense. Not the science of it, because there is no science, but the emotional drives that got people there. And that was when it became interesting for me, and less of a quirky belief and more of something that merited exploration.
And we were talking just a couple of questions ago about how many, when I asked you about how many members of the flat Earth community there are, and a lot of them would not want to say that and not want to admit to that. And as you write in your book, many members of the flat Earth community are subject to ridicule and social rejection by friends and members of their own family. How do they deal with it?
It's challenging. And in some ways, I think this is a vicious cycle. Conspiracy theorists often feel some level of alienation before they get into their belief. Conspiracy beliefs help people identify with a community or something. So often conspiracy theorists are looking for belonging when they look for these theories. But what happens instead is that, say you're a flat earther and you're newly passionate about this theory, and you can't keep bringing it up at dinner with your family and with your friends and your coworkers, people start to pull away from them because they think the theory is a little too weird, or they think the person's being too aggressive about it. And so when people become further isolated from those real world connections, they go and they turn further toward the online community that has been supporting them. So they identify further and further with flat Earth, and they become more and more entrenched in this community that is kind of drawing a veil between them and the real world.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning, the reading you gave us from the opening of Off the Edge, you were talking about Mike Hughes, and late in the book, you devote an entire chapter to Mike. Can you tell us more about him?
Sure. So Mike Hughes was, for many years, one of the most visible faces of the Flat Earth movement. He was a fascinating guy. He was an amateur rocket stuntman, kind of an Evel Knievel type. And he had this idea that he would launch himself in a rocket high enough that he could see and photograph the Earth's curvature or lack thereof. And that would be it. That would be definitive proof. So he did a lot of these rocket launches at incrementally higher heights. And in February 2020, he did a launch that it was not intended to prove flat Earth or not, but it was the highest he'd ever done, and it went catastrophically wrong. The takeoff went sideways. He went way high up. His parachutes failed, and he died on impact. And it was a very eye-opening incident. As I referenced in the book, part of me thought that he would withdraw from the scheme before anything bad happened, and he really he went through with it.
Mm-hmm. He had this interesting thing that he told you, this interesting comment that I found quite fascinating. He said that you write that he arrived at flat Earth gradually through decades of discounting the histories he learned in school. And he told you that it never starts with flat Earth for anybody. It always starts with something else. And his starting point for skepticism was learning that the U.S. Army had massacred hundreds of Native Americans at Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1890. Did you find that to be the case, that the flat Earth, that was kind of the entry point for flat Earth believers, that it was not flat Earth itself, it was something like what Mike said or some other kind of thing?
Generally, yes. Not always exactly Mike's answer,
No.
but I found that flat Earth is really difficult to just jump into if you're not into any other conspiracy beliefs. So people usually got there via other routes. I talked to a lot of flat earthers who said they got into flat Earth via 9/11 trutherism. They were really interested in that conspiracy theory, and while they were researching it online, maybe a flat Earth video popped up in the YouTube recommendations, or a conspiracy writer they were talking about referenced flat Earth, and they decided to explore that direction. I think the thing with conspiracy theories is they erode at our trust in accepted narratives. And so when you accept one, you can accept more. And the other thing, I'm so glad you brought up Mike's path here, which was not necessarily via 9/11 truth or something like that, but via actual forgotten or, neglected incidents in US history, which he might have been right. Maybe he didn't learn about these things in school, these atrocities that are very difficult to talk about. And while that isn't a cover-up, the massacre of Native Americans is not something that, we cover up in schools anymore. I think the realization for him and for a lot of people that the world is not as it seems, and that our governments have done terrible things, that in itself is destabilizing. And the feeling that he wasn't taught that really helped lead him into other quests for truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said. I like what you just said there. I want to get back to after Mike Hughes' death. In the aftermath of that, his PR representative, Darren Schuster, had made an interesting comment. Can you tell us about that and your reaction to it?
Absolutely. So Darren Schuster was Mike's agent, and after his death, Darren said that Mike had been putting this all on. He was not actually a flat earther. He was doing this for attention and for ways to raise money. And I thought that was really interesting. It's something that bothered me for a while because I'd known Mike for a couple of years by the time he was dead. And I went talking to a lot of people who knew Mike very well. And they disputed that to various degrees. I had some of Mike's friends who said he was absolutely a flat earther, and I'm not even a flat earther, and I couldn't get him to stop talking about it. And I think maybe the best answer I got was from one of his friends who was there the day of his death. And he said that Mike was always questioning. Mike was not necessarily someone who, said that Earth is flat or not, but he was interested in the theory. And he was interested in the theory enough to pursue it. And then over the pursuit of that question he actually became convinced. So I think my takeaway from trying to figure out exactly what it is that he believed was that he spent the last few years of his life being a vocal flat earther. And if he entertained his doubts, he was private about them. And I think what he did was so, it was so positive in terms of flat earth. He was one of its biggest advocates that I think it's almost a moot point whether he harbored doubts in the last moments, because he was someone who helped put this theory on the map. And whether he was earnest about it or not, he is a huge chapter in how it's come to affect us today.
Definitely. Why do you think flat earthers want to believe that they live in a different world?
Conspiracy theories are a way of addressing what we think is either a lack of information in the world or refuting what they think is uncomfortable information. They're a means of finding alternate explanations. And for flat earthers, I think a lot of them want to believe that Earth is different than what it seems, or sometimes that it's smaller, that it's more under control, that it might follow a biblical model more closely. I remember hearing a woman talking at a flat Earth conference, and she said that prior to finding flat Earth, she had been a little frightened by the idea that outer space was this just this vast, expansive place that we're located in, and that we're very small in its expanse, that we don't really have a lot of control over it, and that when she found flat Earth, things made more sense to her. It was a more manageable scale, and she felt seen, and she could find herself in this smaller universe. And I think that gets to a lot of it. It reduces the universe to a manageable scale. And it's a very contained universe. It's one that people can connect to their religious beliefs often. And I think for certain people, it's a very compelling vision.
And you describe it so well in your book. You say, flat Earth is a bracket on understanding. It narrows the world to a safe frame, which is just what you've been saying. That makes things more manageable, as you said. You mentioned earlier about anti-Semitism and how that sometimes finds its way into flat Earth belief systems. Can you talk a bit about how this happens?
Sure. So conspiracy theories often work on a very us versus them basis. They divide people into a small in-group that is in the know about a theory and understands it, and the out-group, which is either actively conspiring against them or passively is blind to the truth. And very often throughout history, that structure has been used against minority groups or disenfranchised groups, and very often for centuries that minority group has been Jewish people. So we have centuries of this conspiratorial skeleton, so to speak, this structure of conspiracy theories that have been used to denigrate Jewish communities, to support other communities, be they religious communities or racial communities, but saying that Jews were the architects of some nefarious plot. And even though we don't see so much of that outright bigotry in this exact moment, the shape of those conspiracy theories is still very present in the way that we talk about conspiracy narratives right now. So when modern day flat earthers talk about who's doing the plot to conceal the the flat earth, it's very easy for them to either accidentally or sometimes intentionally import these old conspiracy theories that have these anti-Semitic leanings. So I've seen some people who I believe were anti-Semites before they were in flat earth very deliberately smuggle in these talking points. And I've also seen a lot of flat earthers who are not deliberately anti-Semitic invoke these old theories, and in a way that I don't think they fully understand what they mean. So then at that point, we have these discussions and I say, do you understand the implications of this thing when you're using these euphemisms? Do you understand that they are euphemisms for a specific population? And so again, either deliberately or unconsciously, this kind of bigotry can get smuggled into an unrelated conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm. And when you try to help them understand this, what they're, that what they're saying is anti-Semitic and things, do they see that? Does a light kind of go on? Are you able to convince them that they shouldn't be spouting these kind of comments?
Sometimes I think it's difficult for people because what I have to do is kind of go back and trace the origins of conspiracy theories that people believe to be true. So it's difficult sometimes to connect in someone's mind the justification for their conspiracy theory and explain that what they're using as evidence is actually a century-old forgery made in Tsarist Russia to blame a local Jewish population for uprising. It's hard to make that connection, but earlier, and I do regret that I cut out, because what I was trying to say is that often making personal connections with conspiracy theorists is something that helps them get a little bit of grounding. And one way that I've actually been able, I think, to connect with people on the anti-Semitism is that, I'm not personally Jewish, but I have Jewish heritage in my family. And at a conference where this was coming up and, there were anti-Semitic speakers on stage, talking to my neighbors at the table and saying, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about this because this is being alleged of me and my community. And, you see me here as another person. Do you think that's true? And people didn't think that was true. So I thought that was promising that we could still, have a little human to human connection, even when we didn't agree on major facts of how the world works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been almost a month since your book Off the Edge was published. What kind of responses have you received?
From round earthers, very positive, I'm glad to say. From flat earthers, it's been a little mixed in a way that I think is interesting. This is not a pro flat earth book, so I'm not surprised that some of them are annoyed. I'm not sure all of those who are annoyed have read it, but I've also received, I think, some positive feedback, or at least feedback that shows that people are thinking. I've received some nice feedback from people who knew Mike Hughes, and also from a prominent flat earther who said, okay, hey, we don't agree about the substance of this theory, but at least this book was, it pointed out some community issues that we do need to address. And I thought that was a very honest response. And I do like to think that maybe the book has got some wheels turning and maybe it's got some people thinking.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope so. That's great. Kelly Weill, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us tonight. And thank you for writing Off the Edge. It's a very intriguing and very well-written book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. So we've got here, I'm checking the Q&A here, questions. Here's a question from Lois Patton. I think, let's see here. Can you see the question?
I think I can.
Or I can read it to you.
Box.
Yeah. The question from Lois is, have you identified any common trait in those who believe these theories that have so much evidence to counter their beliefs?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
So,
it is.
what I would say is that very, very broadly, everybody has some capacity for conspiratorial belief. And like I said, this happens when we're feeling uncertain, when we feel like we don't have enough information. We go kind of looking for answers in unusual places. I think a lot of us have the ability to filter out bad information, but sometimes we have conflicting motives. Sometimes we really want to believe something because it's reassuring to us. It makes us feel better about instability, or it makes us feel better about ourselves personally or a community we belong to. And having that motivated reasoning, I think, causes people to stay in a conspiracy belief longer than the evidence supports it. And so when you get into really committed conspiracy belief movements like Flat Earth, a lot of these believers have almost made Flat Earth part of their identity. It's something that's very central to them, and they have a lot of emotional reasons for not wanting to let go, because to do so would, force them to radically reevaluate the world again, and in a way that doesn't reflect so well on the place of belief that they previously were. So the short answer to your question is, I think people have emotional motivations that cause them to stay in this belief, even when it's contrary to all evidence.
Yeah, very well said. Thanks for the question, Lois. We have another question here from Jill Bellos. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Jill. If I'm not, I apologize. She looks forward to reading your book. And two questions from Jill. Any suggestions on dealing with people who have these beliefs? And also, what was the most surprising thing you learned by writing the book?
So in dealing with these people who have very fringe beliefs, I think one of the best ways to approach the conversation is, not with ridicule, even though Flat Earth kind of sounds funny. I still sometimes think it's funny. But trying to understand the emotional underpinnings of their belief. And, if people were looking for community when they set off on their conspiracy journey, can you offer a different form of community? I saw I saw someone post online the other day, and they said that I think it was their aunt, was very involved in the QAnon conspiracy theory, which has a huge online community around it. And she recently became very involved in K-pop, which is a musical genre, Korean pop music. And that also has a big community. And she pivoted. She left this conspiracy belief because she was getting a lot of that emotional sustenance from fellow music fans. And I thought it was such an interesting case study. And it won't necessarily work for everybody, but it suggests that there is something there. Most surprising thing I learned, it's very easy to assume that conspiracy theorists are unintelligent. And that really wasn't the case with everyone that I met. I mean, they compromised the whole range of human experience. I met flat earthers with master's degrees. And Mike Hughes was doing amateur rocket launches, which are not easy. You need a good level of know-how. So I think sometimes the relatability of people really knocked me flat, and it was very eye-opening to see that these were, people that I could have known in my everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's a question from Robert. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. I just didn't think we had enough time to talk about it. But Robert has obviously read the book, and he says one of the fascinating things in your book was that Zion, Illinois became a center of the Flat Earth movement. And he's right, it was very fascinating. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. So in the early 1900s, I don't know how many viewers are familiar with Zion, Illinois, but there was a town slightly outside Chicago that was founded as a fairly fundamentalist Christian community. And due to its founding, the church had control over local schools and how local parks were administrated, how certain morality laws were implemented. But a funny thing happened a decade or so after its founding, which was that a very fundamentalist preacher took over, and that preacher became a very vocal flat earther. And he, due to the power that he had as the leader of the church, was able to put flat earth in the schools and outlaw references to the globe in church hymns and really rule with an iron fist. So you had this town that for decades actually was close to a flat earth cult. And I don't think anything has existed exactly like it before or after. It's a very weird chapter in Illinois history where flat earth did reign supreme.
Yes, Robert Mitchell, thank you very much for that. I'm glad he wrote in with that. That's about all we have for questions and answers. Was there anything, Kelly, that you didn't get a chance to say?
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for these great questions.
Thank you for the great answers.
The thing that I would just stress, again, is that conspiracy thinking isn't a weird quirk. It's not something that just tinfoil hatters do. It's something that I think we can all recognize a little bit in ourselves. And my great hope, and I know it's difficult, is that maybe in understanding those thought patterns, we can try and help other people disengage with them.
Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you so much, Kelly. So great to talk to you. And hang on. Oh, here's one. We got time. Are from Nina Ganbarza. Sorry, Nina, if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Nina wants to know, are there any big flat earth communities outside the US? Britain is home to quite a number, right?
Yes, Britain is, Canada is, Brazil is, which I find very interesting. And I'm unfortunately not Portuguese fluent. That's a whole book for a Brazilian journalist to do, but they have really thrived on, flat earth has really thrived on a lot of the misinformation networks that are prominent in Brazilian politics, a lot of WhatsApp groups, that sort of thing. And there is a burgeoning flat earth community in Australia, which I think is very funny because the flat earth model is not geographically kind to Australia. So they have to go the extra mile to make it work in their ideology.
Yeah. Leslie Davis thanks us. So thank you for this perspective, and she looks forward to reading the book. Well, do you know yet? Can you tell us what your next book's going to be? Are you working on a new book yet?
I do not have a new book yet. I think I'm taking a little bit of a sanity break, but after that will reassess, and I'm sure there's no limit to strange thinking or interesting corners of belief to explore.
Yeah, and I don't want to put any pressure on you because I'm sure you put enough pressure on yourself, but we'll look forward to reading it when you write it. And thank you again, Kelly Weill. Such a pleasure to talk to you. And I'll turn it back over to Chris Lee. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you both so much. What a wonderful evening. Doug, thanks for a wonderful interview as always. And Kelly, thank you so much for being here, reading a great book. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. And to everyone who watched, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a good evening. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. Good night, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Night, Kelly. Thanks a lot.
Night.